One of the things I think is really great about wild food is that it's one of the few truly zero guilt foods. Human beings have been foraging for a very, very, very long time. Human species has existed for about 200,000 years. Agriculture has only been around the last 10,000 years, which means for the first 190,000 years, this is what we did, and this is what we did every day. This is what we did for a living. This was our job. So I think it resonates with us to repeat the activity that we evolved to do. So I think it's really satisfying and contributes to a sense of well-being to occasionally be able to go out and repeat this activity. So this is a plant that I think most people have probably had a run-in with, for good or bad. It's a stinging nettle. It's very well known as an edible, and it's incredibly nutritious. It knocks spinach out of the water, really. And that's the case for a lot of wild plants. They tend to be really, really nutrient dense. And why is that? Why would wild plants in general be more nutrient dense than cultivated vegetables you buy in the store? Well, it's because cultivated vegetables have undergone hundreds of years of selection to turn them into what we want them to be. But unfortunately, we haven't been selecting for nutrition as much as we've been selecting for size, sweetness, reduced bitterness. So we've created vegetables that are bigger, but don't contribute as much to our health as wild plants would do. There's so many reasons for why foraging is so satisfying. And one of those reasons, for me at least, is the sense of independence that you get. I think it's profoundly satisfying to know that you can find food, which is the most fundamental of requirements for survival, regardless of what happens. So the wild environment will always be there for you. So if you know how to find your food in nature, that's something no one can take away from you, and it will always be there. And I find that very comforting and very satisfying. This is the hawthorn tree. It's a really great edible because it's so easy to recognize, and it can be found pretty much anywhere. You recognize it by the leaf shape. They have this very characteristic flame-shaped leaf and have a long tradition here in the UK as a roadside nibble for kids going to school. Later in the year, this fruit turns red. When it turns red, it's ripe and it's edible. The fruit pulp is a little bit on the dry side, but if you knead the fruit in between your hands, the fruit pulp comes off the seed, and then you can dry that, and it makes a really tasty apple-flavored snack. Learning to forage changes the way you see the natural environment around you. If you don't know the plants you're looking at, you tend to see a hedgerow or a park as a wall of green. But learning to know these plants make you see your natural environment at greater resolution. Once you know the plants and know what they're used for, you don't just see this wall of green stuff. You see goosegrass, you see hedge mustard, you see hawthorn, you see stinging nettle. And I think this shift in how you see the nature around you also makes you value your natural environment more. It makes destruction of the habitat less acceptable to you because you get this sense of loss, because these are plants that you know and plants you have interacted with. And this sort of shift in mindset is something that I really try to encourage. When we harvest wild foods, we typically don't even kill the plant we're harvesting. We typically just pick the tip of a shoot, or some fruits, or some flowers, and eat those. So the plant just keeps on living and doing its thing. So this is cleavers, also known as sticky grass, which probably is known to all children across the UK, because if you throw it, it sticks. So it's a very easy plant to identify because of that characteristic. And if you pick the tip of the shoot when it's still tender, it's really delicious, spoiled like a spinach, or you can even put in a glass of water or a bottle of water and infuse it with this really, really nice grassy vanilla flavor. That grassy vanilla flavor is a flavor that we in the West aren't very used to. It's not really used much in our cuisines. However, in other parts of the world, it's a commonly used flavoring. It's very similar to pandan leaves, which are used in Southeast Asia a lot. And learning to forage isn't just about learning to find what foods are available around you. It's also about learning to appreciate the flavors and textures of those foods. It's not that wild foods are intrinsically any weirder than the foods you find in the supermarket, it's just that we happen not to be used to them. And once you get used to them and you learn to appreciate them, then you have an access to 0 food mile, no pesticide, totally free food, which is pretty great. This is plantain. It's a really, really common plant, and you see it a lot on lawns in people's gardens and along paths. It can be eaten throughout the year, but we only really eat the most tender, softest leaves in the middle of the rosette. The bigger leaves can be a bit tough and a bit bitter. Typically, boil it, use it like spinach, or add it to cooked dishes like stir fries or lasagnas. They're quite easy to recognize because they have very distinct parallel veins that run up along the leaf. And what's very typical for the plantain family of plants is that the leaf veins are kind of stretchy. So sometimes when you pick them, you're left with a little bit of stretchy leaf vein sticking out from the stem. And sometimes when you pull the leaf apart, you can also see that these veins protrude from the broken edge. And that's a very diagnostic feature of the plantain family, and that helps you know that you've identified the right plant. Since the last time I was here, this huge willow tree has fallen over, probably because of the wind. And it's always really sad to see a tree fall. But with willow, they usually produce long straight shoots coming up from the ground where they're broken. And those shoots are really good for making baskets. So I'll come back here next spring to see if there's anything I can gather to use for making baskets. This here is a really wonderful plant. It's called hedge garlic, and you can find it almost anywhere. Like the name suggests, it has this really nice garlic scent, and sometimes you can actually smell it before you see it when you're walking through the woods. We're now in late July, and it's actually a really good time to be looking at this plant because at this moment we can find both young leaves from new plants that have germinated this year, and we can find the older plants from earlier this spring. And that's interesting because both the young leaves can be used. You can chop them up raw in salad or use it to flavor cooked dishes. But you can also use the older plants. You can eat the little flower clusters, or you can harvest the seeds that you find inside these little spikes here, grind them up with oil to make your own mustard. So at this time of year, we can actually harvest every stage of this plant. Getting out among the trees and looking for your own food is almost like a natural antidepressant. You have to slow down, and you have to look at what's around you, and you have to go with the rhythms of nature. And what's available when, you couldn't change even if you tried to. So you just have to slow down and use what's there when it's there. And I think that's a very healthy thing to do.